The Twilight Zone. Now, The Twilight Zone is a classic TV series that was made in the 50s and the 60s. Basically, talking about a whole lot, you know what I'm saying? Hitting us with a whole lot of twists. It was done very well for a TV series that was made decades ago that was still in black and white. Now, a lot of episodes are good, some episodes are great, and a very few of them are some of the greatest of all time. The one I have for you today wouldn't normally be ranked up there. I mean, I would assume so. It wasn't particularly one of the greatest if I had to pick, if I had to make a list. However, it did make me feel a certain type of way. It was very immersive and it made me basically feel the emotions that the characters were feeling, which is not an easy thing to do with TV shows and movies nowadays, basically ever. That's a skill. That's why this one stands out. A lot of them were great to watch. A lot of them were interesting to watch because of the twist. This one, I could feel the frustration of the characters, and I could basically relate to the ability to try to convince someone of something that they don't understand. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this particular episode. So first, the episode starts off with showing us a spaceship. This is of course around the time that the space war was happening between the US and the Russians, who would go to space first. When this was filmed, the US had not landed on the moon, which is crazy to think about, right? These people were playing actors that were going up to space, yet in their real life, they didn't know of any person, astronaut or not, who had done one of the more unimaginable things, which is setting foot on the moon. But anyway, so they show a spaceship, and the spaceship was a part of a mission that sent up some people up to space. It was a failed mission, and we get introduced to our main character, Forbes. I'll call him Forbes. That's his last name, Forbes. Anyways, he's come to the hospital. Now, the interesting thing about this particular episode is he comes to the hospital to visit one of his astronaut buddies. And you could tell that there's some stress and frustration on his face. Like this guy had gone through some stuff. And I find it very interesting the way that they did this, because they would then show us that he had in fact gone through some stuff the day before. Now, the emotions on his face aren't just how he's feeling now. He's dressed well and he's composed, and we do not fully know the craziness that he had gone through the day before. So when we first see him, when he comes to visit his friend, we are not knowing what happened yesterday, and all we hear is him give us the exposition of what's happening. So he visits his friend, and his friend is excited to see him because, you know, Forbes, as far as he knows, Forbes was let out of the hospital yesterday, and he still has to be in the hospital. Let me rewind, though, why they're in the hospital. So they got on a spaceship, they went up to space, but something happened, and there was a malfunction of sorts, and they landed back to Earth. It was, the only way I can imagine a landing back to Earth and something going wrong is a crash. However, as far as I know, the ship is intact, and these guys got out with barely a scratch, right? So we get to the first thing that you should keep note of, and that's the newspaper. Forbes is trying to first initially gauge what Gart is, what his knowledge is, right? Keeping in mind that Forbes has been through it. So he asks Gart, what do you remember about yesterday? And then he gets to the meat and potatoes of what he's really trying to ask him. He asks Gart, how many of us were there yesterday? And Gart tells him that he was the only one, Forbes was the only person to be released from the hospital yesterday. Now, Forbes is still in disbelief because that's not what he wanted to hear. He pulls up the newspaper and he asks him, what do you see here? And the newspaper says it was two astronauts who had gone up and came down, and it had both Forbes and Gart in that picture. So, as far as reality is concerned, Gart is right. There was only two people, but Forbes tells him, no, there was three of us: Forbes, Gart, and Ed Harrington. Now, obviously, Gart doesn't know an Ed Harrington, and he tells him that he doesn't know an Ed Harrington. But Forbes is frantically trying to convince him of the existence of Ed Harrington. Now, when I was watching this, I didn't believe him, obviously, because he's saying that there was an Ed Harrington a third person, but Gart doesn't believe it, and he picks up the newspaper, and the newspaper says that there was only 2 people. So as far as reality is concerned, there was only 2 astronauts. And then this is when we get the flashback to what happened, okay? And the flashback is different because now there's more beds inside the room, and we get to see this Ed Harrington, and they're having a great time because they just went through a mission, and even though it was unsuccessful, they came back unharmed, and they're doing a lot of joking around because these guys are friends. As Forbes has told us, he's known Ed Harrington for 15 years, and Gart has known Ed Harrington for 5 years. So they've all known each other for years, and they've been on this mission for about 18 months. So boom, in the flashback, Ed Harrington picks up the newspaper, and it says 3 spacemen returned from crash, all alive. And then there's a picture of all 3 of them, Forbes, Gart, and Ed Harrington. So Gart is obviously the most injured out of all 3 of them. He has a messed up leg, so he still has to stay in the hospital. But Harrington and Forbes, they decide to go out and go to a bar. And they go to this bar, and there's the bar is interesting, 1950s. There's ashtrays on the bar. You got there's a woman there with some not so pointy boobs.
That's all very impressive. We'll keep you in mind. Let's see. Pointy boobs, medium pointy boobs, not so pointy boobs. That's a shame.
And she's just sitting there. This is actually hard for me to believe. I didn't know that, men allowed women to just roam free without men back then. I thought they were a little more controlled, but apparently they had the freedom to go to bars by themselves, all alone, with no man. So boom, of course, Forbes decided to sit right next to the woman, and he's trying to get a conversation started with her, but he doesn't have to because the man recognizes that they are the 2 astronauts who were part of the mission that crash landed back on Earth. And so as he's giving them the praise, the woman overhears him. She decides to finally say something to her, and she asks them what's it like being up there, and Forbes uses this as his chance to strike up a conversation with her. Then we go back to Ed Harrington, and this is the moment that Ed Harrington goes from everything is normal to now he's got a funny feeling, and it hits him like a ton of bricks. And he tries to explain this feeling to Forbes. Basically, he's explaining to Forbes that he feels like he could just disappear at any moment. He feels like he could literally not exist. So now he's sweating, he's stressed. He gets up and he goes to the phone booth. He says he has to call his parents. Rightfully so. He gets out of the hospital. He's thinking about his parents, wants to call back. Goes to the phone booth. Operator. It is the 50s after all. And then we don't actually get to hear the conversation with his parents. He calls over Forbes and he tries to explain to him that he just got off the phone with his mother, and his mother tells him that she does not have a son. Spooky. So he tells his mother to hand it to his father, and his father repeats that he doesn't have a son and he would like for the man to stop prank calling his wife. Now Ed Harrington is in panic because I call up my house and my mother and father are telling me that they don't have a son. I would also panic. So boom, Forbes walks away, and when he walks away, he picks up the newspaper. Now the newspaper changes back to the original reality that we, remember in the beginning where it says there was only 2 astronauts. Picks up the magazine, turns around really quickly to the phone booth to find that Ed Harrington has disappeared. Just like how he said that he feels like he could disappear at any moment, he disappears. Obviously, this is strange. Forbes goes up to the bar guy and asks him, hey, where's my friend's drink? Where is it? Because now the drink's gone too. He looks on the ground for the original drink that had dropped and made a mess, and it's no longer there. But the bar guy is adamant that there is no friend, that Forbes came in by himself, and Forbes starts to freak out, and he thinks that they're all playing a joke on him. Now, this is interesting because he runs away, but I don't know how good of a friend I would be to Ed Harrington because I probably would have went back to talk to the woman and seal the deal. You know what I'm saying? It's not every day that you run into a woman with some medium pointy boobs. It's not pointy boobs, but medium pointy boobs, they'll do the job. Forbes is a better friend than I am. He decides to run away and he forgets about the woman. He goes back to his hotel room, and now he's trying to get into contact with his commanding officer, his higher up, right? But of course they tell him that he can't talk to him right now, and they'll call him back. So he has to wait. While he's waiting, his girlfriend comes in. I believe her name is Amy. He was supposed to go pick her up at I believe it was a train station, and but he totally forgot, and she comes in mad. But he has no time to react to her mad, like, anger, because he's still freaking out about the whole Ed Harrington situation. And so now he's doing the same thing he was doing at the bar with his girlfriend. He tries to let her in on it. Then he remembers that he had made I think it was a telegraph, I don't know, but a message or something. He remembers that the message that he was trying to send to her was that he was going to, like, the bar with Ed Harrington, and when he goes to the paper to pick it up, this is his proof. Literally, the message is changed. So he's freaking out some more, but he finally gets that phone call back from his commanding officer. So he gets the call back that he was looking for, he was waiting for, and it's the general. And he says, "Hello, General." He apologizes for calling him so late. He says, "General, it's about Ed Harrington." And we don't hear what the general says, but he goes, "Harrington, sir, Ed Harrington." Obviously, what we can assume is that the general says, "I don't know Ed Harrington, who are you talking about?" This also sends him spiraling. It's at this point that he gets up and he comes to a realization that maybe this is all just a big prank, a big joke that everyone is in on. Maybe like the moon landing, that everyone was in on, that it never happened, right? So he says, chances are he's probably still at the bar. That's the last place that he remembers seeing Ed Harrington. So he sprints back to the bar. The bar is locked up. You can tell that the business hours are over. He looks through the window, and then he crashes, breaks the window, and hops in there. You know what I'm saying? Now, I mean, this is obviously, if you're going to commit a crime, don't be a well-known guy. Like, I'm pretty sure the bar guy is going to remember having met one of the astronauts that had crash landed earlier. And then he's probably going to remember the fact that this guy ran out sounding real crazy. And then coincidentally, somebody breaks into his bar late night. He would obviously be suspect number one. But then this is the point when the flashback ends and we go back to the first reality that we get introduced to, that where there was only 2 astronauts. So boom, Forbes then comes to realization, remembering the words that Ed Harrington had told him right before he disappears, that maybe something made a mistake, that they weren't supposed to be here. And then he starts getting that same feeling that Ed Harrington felt right before he disappeared, that he wasn't supposed to be there. He looks in the mirror. Now, I think maybe that they were going for the effect of he looks in the mirror, but there's no one there, but I can see his arm and stuff. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but it looks kind of goofy to me, right? So we'll just assume that he was just looking in the mirror and he's no longer there, right? So he panics. He feels it happening. He barges out of the door, runs down the hall. Gart gets up from his bed, chases after him, but when he opens the door to look down the hall, Forbes is gone. So he's yelling out, "Forbes!" And the nurse comes to him and tells him, "Relax, you have a broken leg, you shouldn't be up." And he goes, "You have to go after him." "Go after who?" "Forbes, Colonel Forbes." The nurse goes, "Who's that?" She doesn't know. This is the moment that Gart starts to experience what Forbes experiences, because he turns around and he points at the bed that Forbes was at before, and it's gone. Remember, there was supposed to be 2 beds in there. Now there's only 1 bed. So she escorts him, helps him into the bed, and he's freaking out. And then he catches a glimpse of the newspaper, and the newspaper says that there was only 1 astronaut who went up and only 1 came back. Gart is now panicking, and we see it in his face. This is the part that we do it all over again, right? What happened to Forbes is now happening to Gart. Forbes lost Ed Harrington, and Gart loses Forbes. And when we pan away, we pan back to a high-ranking army guy, and he asked about a room. She says room 15 is empty. Now there's no bed in there. So that leads us to believe and understand that they all disappeared. Going back to the original theory, actually this doesn't end well, because that's not when it ends. Because then we get a shot of where the spaceship should have been, and now there's no spaceship. The final thing to disappear. Maybe Ed Harrington was right. Maybe there was a mistake up there. Maybe they weren't supposed to come back. And maybe it's something like Final Destination, where whatever this force is tries to go back and tie up loose ends and slowly takes them all back, right? Out. First it was Ed Harrington, then it was Forbes, then it was Gart. and then it was the spaceship. Every piece of evidence of this mission is now gone. Now, that episode to me was very immersive. Like I said, I can feel all the emotions that Forbes had to believe and know something to a certainty, yet everyone around you is telling you that this didn't happen. You remember one way, but everyone else remembers it not that way. I think this is schizophrenia, right? Isn't this schizophrenia? When you think people existed, things exist, stuff happened, but everyone else doesn't remember it that way? Yeah, man, I felt his frustrations and it was hitting hard. I liked the whole concept. I thought it was cool. I like, the circularness of it, how in the end it was happening to Guard and he finally believes him, but at what cost? The cost that he then disappeared himself. But yeah, it's been your boy. I'm out.